Brock here again. Last time, I discussed the first point under the COSO guiding principle of performance, which is identifies risk. So this time, I'll move on to the second point, which is assesses the severity of risk. Again, performance has 5 points. Identifies risk, assesses the severity of risk, prioritizes the risk, implements risk responses, and develops a portfolio view. So once risks are identified and documented in a risk register, it's now time to assess the severity of the risk and the risk's potential to disrupt the organization's ability to meet its business objectives and strategic goals. And a risk register isn't simply an inventory of the risks. It's used to track risk exposure, which includes impact and likelihood, risk owners, risk treatment decisions, action plans, and residual risk. Residual risk is simply the risk that's left over once a risk is treated. Management can't address or mitigate all risk due to budget and resource constraints. So management decides on how to allocate resources to a given risk based on the assessment of the risk to ensure that the residual risk remains within the organization's risk appetite. Methods for assessing risk fall into one of two buckets: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is subjective. You'll often see risk scales defined as low, medium, and high. Information from international standards, industry best practices, or even prior risk assessments will be used to inform a qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis is useful when there's not a lot of quantitative data available or intangible risks and benefits need to be considered. And qualitative analysis techniques include risk factor analysis, the Delphi technique, and a SWOT analysis. Quantitative analysis, however, are objective. Numeric data such as annualized loss expectancy or probability goes into determining impact and the likelihood of the risk being realized. The quality of the assessment is only as good as the data that goes into it. And the most popular technique for quantitative analysis used in cybersecurity is the open FAIR framework. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one of these two camps. I've seen CISOs fail because they only use qualitative analysis without any hard data backing their risk assessment and severity assumptions. And I've also seen CISOs fail because they've only used quantitative analysis without considering any qualitative factors such as sustainability goals or rolling out a product on time. The most complete and defensible risk analysis depends on both quantitative and qualitative factors. Assessing the risk depends on evaluating the impact and likelihood of the risk. I've talked about evaluating the impact of a risk in previous videos using the business impact analysis. The book, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity by Doug Hubbard and Richard Syrson does a good job at outlining some methods to determine the likelihood of a risk occurring, and they include decomposition, which is a model that breaks large problems into smaller, more digestible subproblems. A Bayesian analysis, which is a model that improves upon prior probability as more information and evidence is gathered. In other words, how do we update our prior likelihoods once we have more information? And a Monte Carlo analysis, which is a computer simulation model that generates many scenarios based on probabilities for inputs. This is an iterative process and can literally take thousands of rounds. Tracking risk and their potential consequences in a risk register allows you to integrate it into an enterprise risk management program more efficiently. Remember, when evaluating the likelihood and impact of risks, it's not only about the controls that your organization is missing, you must also consider your existing security controls. Do they compensate for the risk? If so, how much? Once a risk treatment plan for the risk is determined, make sure that you document the residual risk. But be sure to use the same method to measure the residual risk that you used to measure the original risk, so that way you're comparing apples to apples. So to summarize and break it all down, here are some key activities that you can do for assessing the severity of risk. First, determine the right mix of qualitative and quantitative risk analysis approaches for your organization. Don't get paralyzed by this. Remember, you can always add a quantitative analysis to a qualitative analysis later. Consider your culture and your audience. What does your ERM team already do? Are there opportunities to improve? And do you have the political capital to challenge the status quo? Secondly, develop the risk register to track the risks and the potential consequences. And then finally, ensure you evaluate residual risk using the same method that you did for the original risk. Next time, we'll move on to prioritizing risk. As always, I love your comments. Please keep them coming, and I hope you continue to enjoy these videos. If you want to have a direct conversation, please just shoot me a message and we'll set something up. Have a great week.